Double blanks. Let's read. The land available for wild horses is ever shrinking at the dash of cattle grazers and the government officials who serve their dash. Okay. Understand the context first, and I'll give you a hint. Okay. The hint is there are collocations involved in this. For those of you who I want you to apply, I'll give you a hint. Apply collocations, you might end up getting the answer. One is you need to understand the context meaning, which will give you the answer. Two is you need to figure out collocations. Okay. Again, this is a combination. Okay. You just can't go only by this, or you can't go only by this. You will again be wrong. See, if you go by the collocation at the cost of, that's a collocation, yes, right? But is this the right collocation given the context meaning is something that you also have to look at. So it's a combination of both context meaning and collocations. At the expense of is also a collocation. But is this the right collocation? At the behest of also is a collocation. But is it the right collocation? For those of you who don't know what behest means, what's behest? Anybody? Anybody wants to give it a try? Behest, have you heard that word anywhere? Basically, it's order, command, or it can even be an urgent request. Okay. Now for the second blank, there's again collocation. Can somebody identify the collocation for the second blank? I'll give you a clue. I highlighted the clue. Serve one's what? Anybody? For the second blank, options are influence, fortunes, well-being, interests, affluences, right? Tell me what's the right collocation that you're familiar with, that you've heard people use. To serve one's, I'm writing it here, to serve one's interests, right? That's the collocation. Okay, now good. So we have an idea of all the collocations from the given context. Now, affluence means wealth. Now let's look at context meaning. We have all the collocations. This is clear. These are pretty much the collocations for the first blank, and this is for the second blank. Okay. Now let's look at the context meaning. The land available for wild horses is ever shrinking at the dash of cattle grazers and the government officials who serve their dash. So we're talking about the land available for wild horses is ever shrinking. So the government officials are serving their own interests, who serve their, the cattle grazers' interests. So what is the context saying? The cattle grazers want more land for their cattle to feed on. So obviously they're not bothered about the wild horses. So that's why the land for this wild horses is shrinking. So these guys can get more land for their cattle to graze, right? That's the context. So here, maybe there is a link between the government officials and the cattle grazers. Maybe they have some commission or whatever. Having said that, the land available for wild horses is ever shrinking at the either, not decree. Decree means law, judgment. They are not the cattle grazers, don't say what the law is. So, out. Not at the cost of cattle grazers. Cattle grazers are not losing anything. Out. Right? So, even though this is a collocation, it's not a relevant collocation given the meaning of the context. At the directive of, no, they are not directing anything. At the expense of, not really. At the behest, yes. At the behest meaning either they have ordered the government officials to make sure, hey boss, I need more land for my cattle to graze. I'm not bothered about the wild horses. Right? It's either an order or a command or a request. Whichever it is, the government officials also are serving their interests. Okay? Affluence means wealth. Who serve their interests. So at the behest of someone mean at the command or at the order or at the request of someone. So the cattle grazers have placed some sort of a request, or they are commanding that they need more land for their cattle and they are not really bothered about the wild. So given the meaning of the context, the land available for wild horses is ever shrinking at the behest of cattle grazers and the government officials who serve their interests. Serve one's interests. Yeah, that's a collocation. Yeah. So even though you come across multiple collocations, you need to understand what the meaning the context is giving for us to arrive at the right answer. So it can always fill in the blanks. Can be a combination of either what the context meaning is or what the collocation is, or clue words in the context, right? All of it put together. In fact, I'm coming up with a really nice video for fill in the blanks, especially whether it is single blanks, double blanks or triple blanks, and specifically telling you, these are the strategies that you can apply, right? I just mentioned 2 here. I have shared a lot of strategies earlier also in our multiple sessions, but just keeping you informed. Okay, I'm going to move forward. So the question is, though the law became dash from 1950, it was not until a decade later that any dash under that law was recorded. So double blanks: A, operative offensive; B, invoked crime; C, enacted act; D, effective brief; E, adduced perjury. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's rule out options that make no sense. Let's go from the last option, option E. What's perjury? Anybody? Perjury. 5th E option, second blank. So let's say you're in a court scene, okay? You're one of the witness. So you get on the stand and they take an oath, right? Whatever I say is true, nothing but the truth, blah blah blah, right? That whole statement. You've taken an oath, and then if you say any false statement, right? If you go against the oath that you've taken, that's perjury. Just to give you an example. Okay, what is adduced? ADDUCED. Is it a new word? Anybody knows that word? Have you ever heard that word before? Or you have no idea? First I thought it was a spelling mistake, because I'm familiar with abducted. So I was thinking what this adduce is. Basically anything that you provide as proof. Okay, so both of these words. So if you're basically giving reasons for why you think something is true, right? That's adduce. So though the law became adduced from 1950, it doesn't make sense at all, right? It's very illogical. And perjury also is not a very effective word given the context. So we can eliminate option E. What about option D? Okay, adduce is evidence. Okay. D. Though the law became effective from 1950, it was not until a decade later that any brief under, what is this again is illogical in the context. Doesn't make any sense, right? The second blank, brief. What about C? Though the law, so that's what Sagar's option is. Why can't it be C? So he says, though the law became enacted from 1950, it was not until a decade later that any act under that law was recorded. Now, act is too generic, right? We're talking about something that came into, or something that the law established in this period. It was not until a decade later, so 10 years later is when such things got recorded. So before that, people didn't find the need to put it down or make a record of it or save proof or anything, right? So act, what act? We need a little more. If you look at all the other options, offense, crime, it's a little more specific. And enact again, enact itself means to establish by law, right? To perform, to decree. So though the law became enacted from 1950, I wouldn't say you can enact a law, right? But a law becoming enacting from, grammatically it's not a right construction, right? So you can eliminate option C. What about invoked and crime? Yeah, that's exactly what I explained, right? For option C. Though the law became enacted from 1950 is, yes, improper construction. See, the government, just to put it in context, I can say the government will enact a law is fine. The law became enacted is wrong. Okay, what about invoked and crime? Though the law became invoked. Invoke again is not the right, when I say invoke, yes, it's not just to appeal, Girish. It's also, it's like as though you're calling out for help, right? You invoke maybe God, you can invoke God or, some person for help or for inspiration, right? Not the right word in the context, out. So the only thing is, though the law became operative is in fact a collocation. Became operative, it was not until a decade later that any offense we all know is a violation of a custom or a law, right? Any public wrong or crime. So though the second word in option A, option B and even option E can fit, the only first word that can fit absolutely correct in the context is option A, and that's why it's not option C. This particular law, whatever the law was, right, it came into effect. So operative, it became operative means this law was either established by law or it came into effect in 1950. Okay, but only after 10 years that, so there was a law, but even if people did something wrong, it was not recorded. Like it was not taken into consideration, or it was not investigated, or whatever it is, right? So only 10 years later that anybody did any offense which fell under this jurisdiction or in this particular law, it started getting recorded. That's what the context meaning is. Clear? Okay, so let's move on. Anyway, the answer option is A for this.